Why is the universe so damn quiet out there? Why is the universe in 3 dimensions rather than 10? Could we code a supercomputer into a proton? The Three-Body Problem and its 2 sequels, The Dark Forest and Death's End, try to answer progressively more bizarre scientific questions. And I want to be clear, I don't finish series, trilogies of books very often, but in doing so, this became one of my favourite science fiction series that I have ever read. Cixin Liu, the author for The Three-Body Problem, won the Hugo Award for Best Novel for this book, and let's look at why that was deserved. What do you think, Momo? Do you think The Three-Body Problem deserved it? No. You think you want chin scratches. There we go. Oh. But first, what's it about? Well, The Three-Body Problem is about, it's about this group of people that they... Okay, most importantly, it's about ideas. Ideas in the way that old science fiction of Niven and Arthur C. Clarke and Asimov were a lot of the time. It's about complex ideas and the discussion about them. Plot-wise, it's kind of hard to describe without giving everything away, but it's about humanity's first contact with an alien civilization. Except that they're not here yet, except that they kind of are, and they won't be here for hundreds of years. Capiche? Okay, it's a book about slowly figuring out who these aliens are, why they're coming from all the way out there, and what we should do or not do about it. Should we talk with them? Should we fight them? If we were to fight them, how would we fight them? Who should even be in charge in the first place? Or should we just let them come? Maybe it'll be great. Now, you may love this book for the same reason that a lot of people really hated it, and if you look at Goodreads or Amazon reviews, then they will mention this. It is packed full of dense, complicated, often bizarre scientific concepts, and Cixin Liu will just take 2 pages to explain it to you. It's exposition-y in many ways, you might look at it like that, but I found it compelling because it's really cool ideas that he's talking about, and the way that it works into the book is quite brilliant at many times. I mean, not just quite brilliant, like it's genuinely incredibly brilliant. I just used way too many adjectives. This book, and the 2 sequels even more so, just went way further than most of the hard science fiction that I'm used to reading. And the way that Cixin Liu did it was really cool, because he sort of introduces a lot of concepts that are very real, that we know work, that aren't just theory, like super hard graphite materials or space elevators, which could conceivably happen, even within our own lifetimes. But then he also introduces some really bizarre speculative stuff, like building a supercomputer into a proton. But he does it in a way that really blurs the line between stuff that we know is possible and is pretty speculative, that might not be, that we're not sure about, is kind of just there in theory. And the way that he meshes them together, he convinces you that it's all possible, that this is how things could work. So he gives you the simpler stuff and you buy into the more bizarre stuff. But at the same time, I want to be clear that this is not a character-driven novel, and the characters in the book can feel pretty wooden at times. This is partly because they're often used as representations for ideas more than they're meant to be kind of their own independent characters. And the fact that it was originally written in Chinese means that as it was translated over, a lot of the dialogue, the way people talk, doesn't feel like the way people should talk to English speakers. That's not a fault of the book, but it does affect how you might experience it and engage with the characters. I didn't really feel like I needed that deep character-driven stuff, but if you are the sort of person where you don't like dense scientific concepts, or you really depend on those characters to get immersed in a story, then this may not be the book for you, and that's okay. It can be quite abrupt if it's not what you're used to, like there's this moment in Death's End where he just says, and then she lost the ability to speak for a few days, and then she got it back. basically. But stylistically, I don't think any of that really undermined any of the real draw for me to this story, this fascinating exploration of our place in the universe. The actual way that it's written can feel quite strange to an English speaker. As it was written in Chinese, there's a lot of puns and there's a lot of references that Chinese readers would understand, but we don't. They do actually, however, give us some in the footnotes, which I always found really interesting. They'll be like, hey, this name means this, or this is a reference to this event from the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Part of this is because of the Chinese cultural context of the book. Most of it is told from the perspective of Chinese characters in Chinese history, with a lot of references to Chinese culture and the history that surrounds it. So some of that nuance is going to be lost on you as English speakers. The writing style can also feel unfamiliar at points. I mentioned how the dialogue can feel wooden, but also transitions. For example, they might just say, and then 1 year passed, which feels strange and very abrupt for us reading it. But that's not on the book. That's not a stylistic problem with the book. That is all to do with my experience as an English speaker and reader. And I actually think that reading this sort of stuff, it's good to expand what we can be familiar with. So for me, it was actually kind of enlightening to read a book with such a different way of telling stories and building worlds and characters, even if they're not the way that I'm used to, and meant that I didn't quite get into the characters as much as someone else might if I spoke the language. But the story and the series more broadly does have a collectivist bent to it. And what I mean by that is that in the sequel, The Dark Forest, I remember this distinct moment where he writes, and then Earth solved all of their problems and decided to work together, and I was just like, what? Just baffled. But apparently that sort of collectivist utopian ideal is more common in Chinese fiction, whereas I'm a lot more used to individualist fiction where there's a lot more focus on individual characters. The movers of these stories, of the Three-Body Problem, The Dark Forest, and Death's End, are organizations. They're groups of people much more than the individual characters. Western media does also have stories that put more of an emphasis on the community and the collective rather than the individual. Star Trek does this quite a bit, but apparently it is more common in Chinese fiction than we might have it. Now, I do want to give you a warning, because The Three-Body Problem, the first book in the series, did feel weirdly young adultish when I was first reading it. For the first kind of part of it, you know, you've got all of the world's smartest people being invited to join a secret society and solve this complicated science problem that no one else can, called the Three-Body Problem. And I won't tell you how it fits into the story because it's a brilliant reveal. But it felt kind of younger in how it was playing out. But as it progresses, it definitely does become more complicated and more mature, and that feeling definitely went away for me. The book is divided up into a couple of perspectives, one in the wake of the Chinese Cultural Revolution at a secret Chinese military base, and one in the present trying to figure out the consequences of what happened at that base. Now, normally, I'm always worried about stories that split it up like this, when one is clearly more fascinating than the other. But Cixin Liu doesn't really suffer from this at all. There are so many questions and answers in both of these stories and how they fit together, because they feel just wildly disconnected for so long. And then how they come together, it's brilliant. It genuinely is amazing, and it's such a unique way to do it. That was one thing that really stuck out to me, is that, you know, the setting of the Chinese Cultural Revolution, it's so unlike anything that I'm used to in science fiction, and seeing how that plays into, quite naturally, the events of the actual story and how it leads up to it. It's a mic drop moment. One thing to mention is that though the Three-Body Problem does stand on its own, it's also pretty clearly written as a setup book for the story that Cixin Liu really wanted to tell in The Dark Forest and Death's End. And that's fine, but it did mean that the story ended in a place where I felt like, oh, so the story hasn't even started yet. And because of that, it is probably the weakest of the three in the trilogy. And it's why the immediate sequel, The Dark Forest, is easily the strongest of the trilogy. It's where the meat of that story that I wanted to know about could be found. And I don't actually have The Dark Forest here, because I lent it to a friend after we read this in less than a week. It's that good. It's also the most character-driven of the three. He spends a lot of time getting us invested in the perspective character, and it has a strong, thematic, central scientific question that drives the plot. Why is it so quiet out there? And it all builds together to a really profound ending. But if you like speculative but also hard science fiction, then get The Three-Body Problem and its sequel, The Dark Forest. That's all from me. Let me know what you would like me to review next down in the comments below. I have been reading a lot, and if I haven't read it, tell me what you'd like me to read down in the description below. Anyways, I gotta go. Stay nerdy, and I'll see you in the future.